I get asked an awful lot about how do you get started using bricks alongside Advanced Themer and Core Framework. Well, today I'm going to go through a very simple primer that's going to give you some real-world examples of how you can get started using this. Now, first of all, let me just quickly say this is not a comprehensive guide to all the things you can do. I will reference other videos that I've created which you can check out that goes into more detail with certain different aspects I'll be covering today. Also, I'm going to assume a certain level of prior knowledge that you are comfortable with the basics of using Bricks Builder to be able to create simple pages, and you want to just take it to the next level by using these additional tools to speed up your design process and make your whole design more flexible. With that out of the way, let's take a look at how we get started with everything. Now, I'm going to break this down into multiple different sections. We're going to start off with the tools we're going to use, the differences between other tools you may have been using before, and getting some of those basics in place. Now, first of all, if you are moving over from something like Elementor or Divi and you're not used to working with a class-based design tool like Bricks, there's going to be quite a few different changes that you're going to have to make to become more efficient in the way that you work. Just kind of switching your mindset a little bit. Won't take you very long, and once you kind of get to grips with it, you'll realize just how much more flexible this method of building websites actually is. So, okay, let's take a quick look now at Core Framework. Some of the basics we have set up, and then how we take some of those values and move those over into Bricks itself to give us a flexible starting point for building all of our websites. So this is the interface for Core Framework. You can see we've got things broken down on the left-hand side into colors, typography, spacing, and so on. Again, I've covered a lot of this in its own dedicated videos, which I'll link everything down in the description down below so you can check those out to get more info. So what we're going to take a look at is how we configure some of these options. So first of all, underneath the color section, you can see we've got our 3 brand colors. Now you can add as many more as you want in here or take away if you don't want to use them. If you want to change a color, you can simply click on the preview chip and change it to whatever value you want. You can also change things over based upon the color format you want to use. If you prefer to use hexadecimal values or hexadecimal values with alpha channels and so on, you can simply choose what you want from here, and you'll see that we now have more options available, so alpha channels and so on, or switch this over to something like RGB. You can see we can change it inside there as well. But I'll show you a little later how you can easily change values inside here and have that reflect across your entire site. Again, one of those real benefits of using something like a framework like this. If we scroll on down, you can see we've got things for our background, text, neutral colors, and so on, including things like statuses. Again, we can change any values, add additional ones in by simply clicking the little plus, set whatever values you want inside here, and you are done. If you want to get rid of that, all we need to do is click on the 3 little dots, click on delete and confirm, and we've removed them from the actual panel. It really is quite simple. We're also going to take a look at how we can map various different values inside here to various different parts of our theme style to make sure that we have everything connected up and working seamlessly. You'll also notice we've got things like typography, spacing, and so on. I'm going to leave all these values at their defaults for now. If you want to change them, you can do. It's very easy. For example, with your typography, if you say, for example, you want to set your minimum font size to something different, all you need to do, click inside, change the values to whatever you want. And that will reflect inside our preview window in the main panel, and you can also go in and change the scale ratios if you want to. So for example, your minor thirds and so on. So it's up to you. I'm going to set these back to what I'm used to working with, which is 18 and 20, and we'll leave that as it is. And again, you can add more inside here if you want. Just simply click the plus. You can see this will automatically increment them with 5XL, 6XL, and so on. So it's really, really simple to be able to add more values inside here as you need them. And you can come back at any point and add them in if you want to. Once you've set everything up, you can click on Save Changes, and everything then is saved and committed. So those are the basics of setting up some of the simple values we have. It's also worth going into the Preferences section and taking a quick look inside here. So you can see we've got things like a project title, default themes, and so on. What we also got then is the font spacing. So this is set to 62.5. In other words, 16 is the standard default value for your typography. This will then take 62.5% of it, which means it's 10 pixels, which sounds complicated, but it means that it just makes it a little easier if you want to scale things, if you're using rems and ems and so on. We'll leave this as it is. There's pros and cons to setting this to 62.5% as opposed to 100%, but let's not bog things down by making things too complicated. Your maximum screen width, 1366, which is perfectly fine, but if you want to change that, again, you can do. There's a little note here that says, if you're using a website builder, which we are, we're using Bricks, you want to use this variable. So you can see we've got the max screen width. Let's copy that from there for now, just so we can use that and I can show you how we can use it. Let's copy it, job done. Then you've got some other options if you want to use them, so things like prefixes and customization. So if you wanted to give this a custom prefix to all of your classes and variables and so on, you can simply pop those inside there, and also for the variables. Up to you if you want to use it. I'm going to leave it as it is. And we're going to leave all the other values as they are for now, and we'll click on Save Changes to make sure everything is committed. So now we've got the basics set up inside Core Framework, which we can change at any point if we want to. We can easily now move these values over into Bricks itself. So let's just open up any page in Bricks. I've created a blank home page. This is part of my sort of starter site. Again, I've got a video on my blueprints, which you can check out here and link in the description. We'll show you how I've got all this set up. Let's open up our home page. So this is my blank home page ready to set things up. And you can use this on any page you want. What we're going to do is we're going to come into our settings section, open up our theme styles, and I've created a theme style called Bricksies Global. If you haven't set one up, it's very simple to do. All you need to do is click on the plus to create, give this a name and save it. And once you've done that, you set your condition up to say where you want to use this. In this example, the entire website. So providing you've got that, we now have our theme style ready to be able to map those different values. So let's take a look, first of all, at that maximum width we've got set inside Core Framework. What we're going to do is going to come into our element container and expand this. And you can see we've got width, minimum width, and so on. So what we can do is you can put arbitrary values inside here, but that really loses the flexibility. If we just pop in that variable that I just copied over from Core Framework, you'll see that 1366 value is now inserted in, but we're using a variable to do it. What this means is that if we go back to Core Framework and change that 1366 to something like 1400, 1200, 1100, whatever you want, that will then reflect on the site without us having to come back here and make changes, and you have various different locations in which you make changes. This is where when you start to use a framework like Core Framework and you set things up, and this is why I would always recommend you have a blueprint, because chances are all these things are going to be set up beforehand and then you just use Core Framework to make those changes. It just opens up a ton of flexibility without having to and fro all over the place and potentially forget changing a value inside here. If we're using those variables that map over to Core Framework, half the work is done for us. So what you can do is you can also set up your minimum width if you want to. So you can do min screen width. You can see when you start typing in, that pulls in the value pulled in directly from Core Framework. You kind of get the idea what you can do here. You can set up your basic values to start off with. So again, if we now close this down, let's come into something like our colors. Open this up, you can see is our primary, secondary, and so on. Well, we've got some primary colors, secondary colors, tertiary colors, and so on, all created inside Core Framework. So let's map those over. And then everywhere, things like buttons and so on that uses the primary and secondary and so on, will automatically have those values pulled in from Core Framework. You can see this is going. It's just like kind of mapping these things together to give us one source of truth, which is the Core Framework editor, that will reflect across our entire site. So for our primary color, we'll click and open this up. There's our primary. You can see hover over it. It tells us var primary. There's our primary variable. Job done. Secondary. Come into our secondary. Come into our light color, for example. There's light. Come into our dark color. There's dark. You can see where I'm going with this. I'm not going to go through all of these, but we'll go into, for example, our success, which will be this green color. And our warning, which will be this red color. And you can map any other ones you want inside here. So pretty cool. Same thing goes then for things like our typography. So if you open our typography, you can see there's our base font size. That's 62.5%, which is perfectly fine. It's the same as what we have set up inside Core Framework. Then you can come into your body, for example, and you can say what kind of typography do you want to use? Well, we've got this text medium. Let's get rid of that completely. Let's right-click inside here, and this will open up the little context option for Core Framework. There's our fluid typography settings. And as you can see, as we make changes, it reflects on the screen itself because these are using variables as part of the header and footer templates. Not going to worry about those. We're going to set this to medium, which is the kind of base value that we've got for our typography. That's perfectly fine. Again, if you want to change things like your color, you can do. So you can see we've got our variable for text body. I've set some of these up previously using the same principles. Again, you can click, change this to whatever you want. So you've got your base values and so on. Change it to a color. It's a variable, so those variables can be updated inside Core Framework and reflected throughout your entire site. Same thing goes for your headings. You can come in here, change your color. Now, obviously, you wouldn't want to set a font size for all your headings. That would be a bit silly. So we're going to leave that as it is. But you can, if you want to, map your headings in various different ways. But we've got those set up anyway inside Core Frameworks. We don't need to worry about that. And you can carry on going through here, setting things up. So for example, we come into our button this time. Let's go into, for example, our primary. Well, we can choose the primary option. So our background color, we'll click. We can choose our primary from there. You can set any sort of hover value. So secondary, for example, we'll come into our secondary. We'll set the options inside there for our secondary color. Style light, same thing again. Choose one of our light values. Dark, choose our dark value. Cool. You want to change the hover state? All you need to do is click on the pseudo classes at the top and change this to be the hover. You can see that now changes our buttons over. So for example, if we come into our primary, our background color is set to this kind of dark color, which is fine. Our typography color is set to this white, again, which is fine. So like I say, I've set some of these values up already, but you can see how it all works. You're setting them up to be globally accessible inside the editor itself. Once you've finished with all that, we can close this down. We'll hit save to commit those changes. And now we can start adding in and using those variables. If you want to make changes, you can come in here and add variables in if you haven't already, if you forget something. And then if you want to make a change to any of those colors or anything else, you can do that inside the Core Framework editor. Pretty cool, pretty simple, and very, very powerful. Now, if you're getting value from this video, why not hit that subscribe button to be notified as soon as new content is added? I release videos every single week on a range of different topics, including tons to do with Bricks Builder. Hit that subscribe button down below and be notified as soon as new content is added. Anyway, let's get back on with the tutorial. So now we've seen those basics, let's now move on and take a look at some of the options I've got set up with Advanced Thema, just to make our lives a little easier. Now I've got a video that's dedicated to the top options that I recommend setting up. There are still some new ones that are coming out because my team's changing things on a very regular basis, so there may be some additional options that have been added in since then, which I would recommend, and I will be doing another video on this in the future. But the link is in the description down below. Okay, so if we take a quick look over on the right-hand side, you can see I've got all these shortcuts, which means that I can easily and quickly add in common different elements that we use. Let's take a quick look. If I click the first one, that adds a section in. If I click inside the container, for example, and I add 2 blocks in, you can see now I've got a couple of blocks inside here. Really quick and easy. Let's say, for example, I want to change this from a div to something else. I can click where it says div, and I can choose from a range of different options. You'll also notice across the top, we've got an additional option called AT, which is the Advanced Thema main menu, which I can click to open up, and there are a ton of options inside here. If you like to work with grids, for example, we can turn those on, and we now get a 12-column grid so we can see how our design is working. So many different options inside here. Like I say, it's beyond what I want to cover in this video. I've covered quite a few of these different options in their own dedicated videos, and I will be adding more in over the near future. Let's turn that back off for now. Okay, so there's some of the basics we've got set up. Now let's take a look at how we can start to build things out. We've added this section in, but you'll notice I've got a bit of a problem. Where I've got this navigation bar at the top, which is a separate little template, because this is a sticky header, automatically things go behind it. So we have a little bit of a problem here where the top part of this section is now sitting behind our navigation, so we need to push it down. Well, let's make sure we've got this section selected. Let's rename it, just for good measures. Now we're going to come over and we're going to create a class. Now a global class allows us to apply this to any other element we want to at any point in time. So what we're going to do is we're going to click inside here and we're going to start this off with global. I like to precede my custom classes with the term global because it makes things just a little bit easier to be able to find them. Then we're going to do a dash and we're going to put, it's a very long class name, but well, it's there to sort of describe exactly what we're doing. So we'll hit enter or return, and now we've applied a global class to that hero section element. Now, nothing has happened because we've done nothing with it yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to come into our style section, and from there we're going to come to layout. We're going to come to our top margin, and we're going to right click like we've seen. And again, you can see this opens up that context menu. Now we've got our fluid spacing set up. We're going to set this to be 2XL. Which is defined, like I say, in Core Frameworks. And now we've got this space at the top. This means that we don't have to remember the values we've used inside there. All we need to do is apply this class at any point to any other section we add in, and that will add that on top. So let's say, for example, let's minimize this. Let's just add another section in. Okay, so there's our section. So let's just select that section, come back over, type the word global. Well, there's our global section margin, click, and now we've added that margin, a 2XL margin to the top of that section as well. Simple as that. Okay, so let's get rid of that now. There's our hero section. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of the other options we have. Inside here, we've got 2 blocks. These blocks are basically going to contain our left and our right pieces of content, an image and some text, your typical kind of hero section. So what we can do is we can select this container and we can come over to our classes and we can start to use some of the global classes we've got set up as part of Core Framework. So for example, if we type in col, you can see columns. Let's do columns 2. We now have a 2-column grid set up. Want to put a gap in there? We can just click and we can put gap. And we can choose a gap. So let's go for something like medium. So cool. We now have basically like a CSS grid, or we've got a 2-column layout, which you can do, and you can start to build these out by using these kind of like classes that we've got set up as part of Core Framework. For me personally, this isn't the way that I work. I prefer to use sort of CSS grid and have more control over things myself. But you can use these options if you want to. Again, if you want me to go into more detail about this, let me know in the comment section down below. But for me, this can very quickly add up to a lot of different classes applied to a container or a section or whatever it is, and it can get a little bit unwieldy. So let's take those off. Let's remove them. Let's go back to what we had originally, which is just our basic container. What I prefer to do is come into the content area, and from there we're going to set this display to be grid. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do 1FR, 1FR. So we now have basically the same thing. Want to put a gap in? Let's use one of our variables from Core Framework. So let's set that same inside there. So now we've got exactly the same thing set up. But the beauty of this is we can apply this to a class, and we can use that class, and then all of these settings will be applied. So we don't have to do one at a time like we've just seen. We can literally do all the things we want inside here, apply it to a class, and then apply that anywhere we've got the same kind of structure. It's a lot more flexible in my opinion. Now before I show you another really useful feature inside Advanced Thema, let's add a little bit of content to these 2 columns so we've got what we want to build out inside here. So the first one is going to have a couple of pieces of text and some buttons and so on. So let's add a heading in, add a second heading in. We're going to come down and we're going to add in just a couple of buttons. And then we're going to go to our second block, and what we're going to do inside here is just simply add an image in. So you can see how much quicker and easier it is to be able to use these shortcuts on the right-hand side for setting everything up. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose the block, we're going to come over, and from the options and the content, we're going to come into our row gap, right-click, and we're going to set this to be extra small. Now we have control over exactly what's being spaced out inside there. Next thing, let's come to our first button, and we're going to right click and we're going to say wrap this inside a div. Expand that div out and pop the second button inside there. This now gives us a little bit more control over the position and so on, in alignment and things of the buttons and things like that. Okay, so we've got our basic structure. Let's just change the content to be a little bit more in keeping. Let's use another little nifty feature that we've got as part of Advanced Thema. Let's add some dummy content in. Cool, there we go. We've got some dummy content. Now, first of all, let's go and choose our first heading. Let's choose this and set it to be H1 because it's the primary heading. Let's choose H2 and set that there. So we've got a nice hierarchy, and it looks absolutely terrible, but we will deal with that in a moment. Let's choose our image and let's pop in an image inside here as well. Let's go for this one, insert that in. Okay, so now we're starting to get somewhere. Let's change our button text. Okay, so we've got the basic information in, and like I say, it looks absolutely terrible. So let's make some changes to this. Now, we could easily start coming in and making changes to all the different elements inside here, but that's not really the best way of working. So what we can do is, first of all, rename these to make a little bit more sense. Okay, so now the naming is done, let's take a look at what's going on inside the actual structure panel. You'll notice that some of these have these little red lines on the right-hand side. What exactly does that denote? Well, this is one of the Advanced Thema options that's telling us that that particular element has some styling at the ID level. In other words, we don't have a class applied to it, but a styling has been applied. Now, before we go any further, let me just quickly say that some people will say to you that styling at the ID level is a big, massive no-no. And in some instances, that is right. But in general, if you've only got one instance of something displayed on your entire site, creating a class for it doesn't generally make a huge amount of sense. It's only one instance of it, so you're still going to have to make changes on that one instance anyway. So Don't think it's a bad thing. However, if you want to use any of these elements or any of these sort of blocks and so on in more than one instance, in other words, you want to use it in different pages or templates and so on, then it makes absolute sense to have classes applied to them. So with that in mind, let's take a look at what we can do here to make our life a little easier. You'll see with all these named, we've got a nice logical hierarchy. So ideally, we would choose these and we would apply a class to them. However, it becomes a bit of a pain when you want to create multiple classes. So let's make life a little easier. What we can do is we can choose this hero container and right click, and we have the option for class converter, which again is another one of those options that we have as part of Advanced Thema. So what we need to do is click on it, and this will then show us a hierarchy of exactly what we've just seen. So there's our hero container, and inside there are all the different elements that we've named. Now, in some instances, we don't want to apply a class to them because it's irrelevant, but other instances, we do. So, for example, I don't care about the hero container, so let's choose to skip that, and we don't care about this one either. What we want to just control is the things like the primary heading and so on. So this is now using what's called BEM naming, block element modifier naming. So the block is our hero container. The element is our primary heading, and we don't have any modifiers applied at the moment. So there's lots of ways in which you can use BEM naming, and if you want to find out more about it, I've got a link down below so you can check that out. So we're going to say we're happy with this. We're going to then have the options underneath. Copy the ID styles to the classes. So we can say yes unless the class already exists. So this stops us overwriting classes if we accidentally have created one before and we've named something the same. So we're going to say yes unless it already exists, and we're going to say erase the ID style. So if you've got any styles applied at the ID level, it will remove those and put them into the classes. Pretty cool. Say create classes, 6 classes successfully created. So let's close this down. Now if we choose our primary heading, you can see there's our hero container primary heading. There's our class already set up. So now we can make styling changes on the class level. So let's come into our style, for example. Let's come into our typography. Let's choose a size from here. So we'll just something like, let's do 3XL. We'll change the font weight. There we go. Looks particularly ugly, but you kind of get the idea. Now if we go to the secondary heading, you can see we've got its own dedicated class. So let's select it. Again, let's choose the text. So let's go for something like XL. There we go. Let's choose our button, our first button. And what we're going to do here is choose the actual class, come to content. I'm going to change this over from style. I'm going to set this to primary. Choose our second button, and we're going to set this to be secondary. Now you see we've got a couple of issues here. We need to change typography colors and so on. So I'll show you how we do that in a moment. But you'll notice that when we've done that, we've got these little red lines by the side of these particular elements. Now you're probably thinking, well, I chose the option to create a global class, and I've selected the global class, and I've set a style to it. Well, that's because these styles where you choose the button style that's part of your theme styles, it kind of goes on the ID level. It doesn't really apply to the actual class itself. So this is something to bear in mind. You are going to get that. So you find if we remove this from here, you see it goes. Once we apply this, you can see it comes back. So now we've got classes applied to all this, so we can control the look of this. So again, let's come into our image, for example, choose that, choose the class for it, come into our styles, and from there we're going to come into our borders and shadows, open this up, we're going to connect our borders together, and we're going to simply choose the right option, grab one of our nice variables that we've got set up as part of Core Framework, and boom, we now have that set up. So you can see how we can start to utilize these together and be able to make changes and set things up the way we want. So let's save this and let's deal with this problem we've got with this button. So you can see that our primary button has the wrong text color. So what we need to do is come into our settings, into our theme styles, come down to our buttons. From there, we're going to come into our primary, choose our typography, and from there, we're going to set our color, and we're going to set this to be one of our variables, which is light, and that picks that up. And again, if you want to change things, then you want to make your type a little heavier, for example, say 600, you can see that makes it a little heavier. So we've got that all set up. Everything is working the way you want. You see how easy it is. Now, let's just say we also want to do something like we want to change the border on it. We want to add a little bit of a radius on there. So let's just choose the option. Come in here, and for this example, we're going to come into our design tab, and from there, we're going to set the radius to be small. And then we've got a rounded button. Simple as that. Okay, so let's just save this, and you can see that's updated everything we want there. So this doesn't look particularly nice looking, but you get the idea of how it works. So let's come back out of this, and let's move on now to create something else. Let's just minimize all this. Let's add a new section in. Again, you can see why I use these. They just make life so quick and easy. So we'll choose our section. We'll rename this. We'll set this to be staff section. And inside the container, we're going to add a single block element in for now. And this is going to be a basic card design for each of our staff members. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop in a heading, we're going to pop in an image, and we're going to pop in some basic text. We're going to rename this to excerpt. I'm going to change our block name to staff card. So now we've got everything set up in there. Let's simply use the class converter one more time. Enable that. You can see this has pulled all the relevant information in. So we're going to say yes to these and create our classes. And there's our 4 classes successfully created. So let's close that down. So our staff card has the staff card class applied, heading, so on and so forth. With that all set up, let's now make that semantically correct. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our container. We're going to click where it says div, and we're going to set this to be a UL, an unordered list. And then we're going to come into our card and change that from a div, and we're going to set this to an LI, a list item. So one thing that happens here is because we've set this to a list item, we need to get rid of an extra little bit of spacing that's automatically added in to list items. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our container, which is our unordered list, come over into our layout, and you'll see inside there, the padding has been set to 40. Let's set that to 0, and we've got rid of that extra little space, and everything is now lined up the way it should be. Okay, let's get styling. First of all, let's add our image, and we're going to come to our staff card, our content, selected image. I've already uploaded a couple, so we'll just add the first one in. So what we're going to do now is we're going to give this person a name, and the excerpt, like we've seen before, let's just get rid of that little bit, and we'll pop in some dummy content. There we go. So let's come back to our card design, select the class for that, come down, and we're going to say for our row gap, right click, we're going to set this to be XS like we've done before. Okay, so there's our basic card setup. Let's choose our image with our class selected, come in, and we're going to just come into our borders, link these together, set our radius, set it to medium. There we go. So that's looking pretty terrible, but you get the idea what's happening here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to come back to our container. We're simply going to come into our content, and we're just going to set this to be a grid. Just to keep this simple, rather than going to CSS grid too heavily, I'm going to reuse the simple option of saying 1FR, 1FR, 1FR. So we now have a 3-column layout. Let's, again, like you've seen before, let's put our spacing inside there. Again, if you want to have more videos on covering how to use CSS grid, let me know in the comment section down below. Take a look at creating something for you. Okay, so there's our basics set up for our first card. Let's tweak the heading a little bit, select the class, come in, and from there, we're going to come into our typography settings. Set this to be large. Font weight, we'll leave it like that. That looks okay. Okay, so now we've got the first things done. Let's come into our image one more time. Let's set up some values inside here. So let's come into our content, set our aspect ratio. For this example, let's set this to be 1:1. Now that's squashed her down, looks a bit silly, so we need to change this over to be cover. As you can see, that doesn't look too bad, but let's just say you want to have a little bit more control over things. Well, we can use another function that we've got available as part of Advanced Thema, which is the object position. You could manually set this if you want to, but you can also use this focus point option. So we'll click on this, change this over to custom, and now we can choose where we want this to be focused. So you can see, we can say focus is going to be mainly on her face, position that we want, and you get this representation then of how it's going to look in the different scales. So then once we're happy, we can click apply, and that now looks a lot better inside our overall design. So now let's go and simply duplicate this a couple of times. We now have 3 iterations of the same person, so we can just easily come into each one of these and make changes. And as you can see, it's very easy to set these options up. So now they've picked up all the same styling because you've got classes applied to them. So let me just show you something now. Because we've got 3 iterations of the same thing here. Let's say we want to make a change and we want to reflect change across all of these. This is where using classes comes in super handy. So for example, let's come to our heading. Let's select one of our headings. Make sure we select the class. Come into our styles. And let's come into our font weight. Let's set this to be something like 700. Looks terrible. Let's say it to be all uppercase, but you can see every single iteration of that on this page and any other page where you're using that same class will have those changes reflected. This is one of the key reasons why using classes is so much quicker and easier than messing about with things like templates and all these kind of other things you can do, and copying and pasting classes and things. This is just so much more flexible. Okay, so there's a really simple example. We now have our 3-column grid. We've got information inside each one of these, and we can see how easy it is to be able to apply classes, and change information, and so on. Very, very simple. Let's save this, and let's move on to the next section where I want to take a look at how we can create more interesting layouts. For example, bento grids are definitely one of those things that's kind of really popular right now. But if you're not used to working with them, they can be quite complicated, but using Bricks Builder, some classes alongside Advanced Thema makes the whole process very, very simple. So let's do that next. Let's close this section down. Let's add a new section into our layout. And from there, we're just going to name this Bento section, and we'll just call this Bento container. And inside there, we're going to just pop in, first of all, a first block. And inside our block, we're going to keep this really simple for the layout and the content. We're just going to simply add a heading in, and we're going to add in some basic text. So we're going to change this to bento block and change this to text. So like we did before, let's make our life super easy. Let's right click on our bento block. Let's come down to the class converter. You can see bento block, heading, and text. Looks good to me. Yes, and create classes. There's our classes created. You can see how quick and easy this is. You don't have to mess about naming things yourself. You can just name the sections, the containers, whatever it is, and then use this option to rename them as you see fit. Okay, so there's our first thing. So first thing you want to do is select our bento block and our class. We're going to come into our layout options, and we're going to just connect these padding options together. Add a chunk of space inside there. Let's do large for this. So let's select our section, and we want to change the background color of this. So let's create a class. So we're going to call this global section dark. Hit enter or return. Now we've applied a class to that. So come to our background, set our background color on there. We'll set it to our dark background color. And now if we want to apply that to any other, we can do that. So for example, we could say our hero section, we can select it, and we can just come up and we can add a new class to that if we want to. So we do global section dark, boom, job done. Simple as that. Want to get rid of it? All you need to do is click on the X to remove it. But you can see you can easily come in and make changes to things should you want to. Then the other thing you can do here is, so we come back to our bento section with our class, select it, come into our typography and set our color on here, because obviously we don't want black or gray text or dark text on the dark background. Doesn't make any sense. So let's set that to be something like light, and that will pick up the formatting in certain instances. Now it doesn't work on things like heading, so you're going to have to come in here and change your heading. So this is where you could, if you wanted to, use a modifier. So for example, where we've got our heading, you can see that's now just a heading inside this bento block heading. But let's just say you wanted to apply a modifier to this. No problem. All we need to do is select it, come over and choose the option to rename the class. So what we need to do is do -- and we'll do light. Hit enter or return. We've now created a modifier. So now we have our BEM naming set up. There's our block, bento block. There's our element, heading, and there's our modifier, light. So now with that selected, we're going to come to our color, and we're simply going to set this to be our light color. And we set any other style we want up in here as well. So let's say we'll set this to be extra large. There we go. And we'll also do things like set this to be capitalized, so each beginning letter is all capitalized, and come to our bento block, again making sure that's selected, come into our content area, set our row gap, we'll set this to be XS like we've done before. Let's choose our bento block, make sure our bento block class is selected, come over into our borders, and we're going to come in and add a border in, so we're going to just link these together, set those to be 1, set this to be solid, and we're going to choose a color. Let's go for something like this for now. And we'll also come in to our radius, and we'll search for radius medium. There we go. And we're also going to set a background color. So we'll change our background color for our bento block, and we'll choose, try this one. That looks okay. Okay, let's save this now, and let's take a quick preview. So you can see there's our first bento block setup. Now, obviously, we've only got one block inside here. So let's go and take a look at how we can create something a little bit more interesting using some of the functions we've got as part of Advanced Thema. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this a couple of times. So we now have a couple of instances of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose our bento container, come over to our content area, and from there we can now start to set things up. So again, let's give this a class, global bento container. So again, if we want to use this in other design examples, we can do. Let's come in and we're going to set this to be grid. And once we do that, we get this new option, which is the grid builder. So what we can do is we can click to open this up, and now we've got a visual representation of our grid, and we can control various different elements from here. Again, I've got a dedicated video on this, which I'll link in the description down below, but I just want to show you how easy it is to set this up. First of all, we're going to set this to be 3 columns and 2 rows. Forget the gap for now. That's just a value that's being put in here. We're going to leave it as it is. We're going to say use min max, and we're going to say replace CSS automatically. Use min max just gives us a little bit more flexibility over the code that's generated for our bento grid. And the replace CSS automatically means that because this isn't put into various different setting sections inside Bricks itself, is actually put into the CSS section. This will automatically replace any changes we make inside here, as opposed to just like incrementing things on. Just keeps things clean and simple. So now what we're going to do is we're going to grab this 4th one, we're going to pop that over to the right hand side. We're going to grab this 3rd one, pop this over to the left, and expand this across the 2. Grab this one and push it over. Push it over to the right-hand side and extend this out as well. So now we've created a little bit more of an interesting grid. So we're going to say apply grid and close. And now we've got our bento grid set up. Let's get rid of this gap and give ourselves a bit more flexibility by using one of our variables. Set this to be medium, which we've used in a lot of different places. And now we've got the basics of a bento grid set up. Now let's go in and take a look at one of our bento blocks. I don't like the spacing on this. I want to make them a bit taller. So what I'm going to do is choose one of our bento blocks, and you'll see each one of these is now highlighted in blue, saying that we have selected a class that applies to multiple different elements inside our design. So now we know that if we make a change to one of these, and I can say, let's just say the 3rd one in this example, we can select it and make a change. So as long as we choose the class, all of those are selected, and now we can come into our style, come into our layout, and what we're going to do is we're going to set a minimum height on there. And for this example, let's just say we want to set this to be something like 40 rem. So in other words, about 400 pixels high. Pretty cool. Now all of those have picked that up, and we've applied that class to them. We can make changes to them, and we can customize and state everything we want, all done on the class level. Okay, so that's pretty cool. We've seen how we can do some pretty useful and pretty nifty little things by using global classes, by using variables pulled in from core framework and so on. Now, let's just say we want to make a change to some of these colors. We don't like this blue color. So what we can do is we can come back out of here and go back into core framework. Let's change our primary color. Let's change this to something completely different. Let's come down and choose this purpley kind of pink color. Hit save changes. And now we've made a change inside just one location. And now if we take a look at the front end of the site, you can see anywhere that's referenced, that change will be reflected. So you can see in this example, it's only this button. But let's go and add that button into a couple of different locations and see how all of them will change. So we've now got 3 instances of the same button, and you'll see they've picked up the same styling because they're set as the primary. So again, if we choose that button, come over and take a quick look, you can see this is set as primary. So again, let's save this. If we take a look at our site, you can see there's our button, there's our color. Let's go back and change that. This time, let's change it to something like a green color. Save our changes, reload our page. There's our buttons, all looking cool. Want to change things like the typography, the text and sizes? Again, super easy. Let's come into our typography. Let's change this over to something really dramatic. Let's just say 10 and 14. So everything looks considerably smaller. Again, let's save things. Let's refresh our page. And all our text now everywhere is smaller because we've made that change in one single location. Now this is really just scratching the surface of what can be done, but hopefully it's demonstrated how you can start to utilize just some of the simple tools that are available inside Bricks, Core Framework and Advanced Thema to speed up your design process and make changes afterwards. Great if you've got a client that suddenly changes their mind that they don't want red, they want to have blue, for example. Well, you can make it in one location and everywhere else will be reflected. Hopefully what you can also see is how using variables inside inside your theme styles and inside the various different parts of your overall settings for elements gives you a lot more flexibility. Now, as always, if you want to learn more about working with Bricks Builder, simply check out this playlist here. There are tons and tons of videos covering things like Advanced Theme, Core Framework, and Bricks itself. Tons there for you to learn from. As always, all applicable links are in the description. My name's Paul C. This is WPTuts. Until next time, take care.